actually a domestic where somebody, one partner took something from the other by force. So that gets classified as a robbery. We had 2 aggravated assaults. One was one homeless guy hit another one over the head with a vodka bottle. And the other was a gentleman who had a dispute with a valet. And when he pulled away too quickly, the mirror hit the valet. So, both relatively innocuous, I guess. And we had one auto theft in which a gentleman left a work vehicle running and another gentleman with mental health issues jumped in and drove away with it. Some of you might have seen a little bit of the excitement down by the water. He drove a very short distance with it, abandoned the vehicle, and then jumped in the harbor. And we had to go in and get him. And that's really it for, the part 1 crimes. Other than that, there's been some instances of, they're recorded as car brakes, but they're really people leaving the car open and change on the front seat or something. And, somebody opens the door and you'll see a bunch of larcenies, but they're all shoplifting from CVS. That's pretty much what we've got for the past month. So by city terms, at least, it's pretty quiet. Cheryl, any current events? Anything anybody wants to ask about?
Yeah, I'm going to open the chat right now. From Dave Kubiak, police details seem to be unavailable, greatly limited resources these days. Construction projects in the North End with potential public safety risks, like the work on Cleveland Place, have not had police detail coverage.
So specifically the past week, all details were canceled because of our need to provide sufficient staffing for the election week coverage. For the entire city, no police details were allowed. And our officers were working 12 hours on, 12 hours off all week. And, there's been, with the various, even before that, with the various social justice events, there's been quite a number of forced overtime being put on the officers. And so, the details are on a volunteer basis. And honestly, they're getting forced for enough hours that they're not looking to do that. I saw some other questions there, Cheryl.
Yes. How do the stats you gave just now compare with the same time period last year?
The numbers are so small. They are lower. I will tell you that I don't have the exact numbers for this, for that particular zone, but I'll tell you that overall for the district, that we're down about between 20 and 25% overall on pretty much everything except for domestics, which are up slightly. I think, people, quite frankly, spending a lot more time at home with not as much to do probably contributes to that.
That could be. We have another question. Are you getting calls about college-age kids having parties? We've been hearing about roof deck parties where police may not have been able to gain access as the party's on the roof.
So we do get calls about it, and we do go. Certainly, we're not always able to get access up to the roof. And it's not the sort of thing that we're going to go kicking somebody's front door in about. But what we do in that case is we record the address, and then Sergeant Moy or somebody else from our community service office contacts the landlord, the next business day or two, and has a conversation with them about that.
That's good. That's good to know. Let's see, in terms of incidents listed, would it be possible to obtain the time, date, location for the incidents mentioned? Thanks, Captain.
Sure.
Doesn't it
Let
go to
me
the North End waterfront? Doesn't it get published there?
Yeah, so the robbery talked about was on Baldwin Place, October 29th. And we had, see, the aggravated assault, like I said, the two gentlemen having a dispute over a vodka bottle was on October 26th at Cross and Salem. And the incident with the valet was at Commercial Wharf.
Really?
28 Atlantic Ave, Commercial Wharf and Commercial Street.
Oh, okay.
And the auto theft was that I was talking about where the guy drove away with it. That was right outside the Coast Guard base.
I think 28 Atlantic is Lewis Wharf. We're 84 on the street side.
Okay.
Could be.
I'm reading it off from the report, so
That's
it may
okay.
have.
We don't have a valet here either, so. But I know they do valet some of the cars over into Lewis Wharf parking lot. Anyway, does anyone else have any questions? How was last week during election week?
No, everything was actually pretty quiet during the week. You know, there were, as I said, a couple of protests and such, but you know, people were reasonably cooperative, and you know, they weren't looking to fight the police, at least. And there was really only one side that showed up. So, you know, that's when it gets difficult, is when you have two sides to a dispute present and we end up having to get in the middle. And that did not happen. For the only exception to that was actually not ours. It was the state police had a small problem in front of the State House. And that, even that involved, you know, half dozen people. It wasn't large.
Okay. Well, that's great. Does anyone else have any other questions? We will let the captain go for the evening. Well, we appreciate you coming by and meeting with us. We look forward to working with you again. We'll have you back next year. You can give us an update. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And as always, you know, if people have some questions that they think of later or whatever, you know, feel free to share my email and they can just shoot something over to me directly, and I'll be happy to. If I don't know the answer, I'll find out.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Next up is the MBTA. Michaela, are you open? I just, yep, you did open. I just opened your mic. Okay, so we have the Michaela Comis from the Community Liaison Team from the MBTA. Now, everybody knows that the T is looking to change and curtail services because they have a budget deficit. We've all seen stories this week about it, about curtailing bus, ferry, commuter rails, and T lines. There has been a change in demand and service during the pandemic, and there is a projected budget gap that's going to result. So I am going to share my screen in 1 second, open up your slides. I got to close everything on my computer. And I'm going to turn this over to Michaela. I'm going to try to get rid of this, but I may not be able to, which is really weird. You okay? Can you hear?
Yeah, I'm great. I think I'm going to share a link in the chat because it comes up multiple times. And I think it just might be helpful to share it now.
Sure.
Awesome. So thank you all so much for allowing me to speak and spending some of your time today. So I think I'm just going to jump into it and kind of explain a little more in depth about what Forging Ahead is. So like it was mentioned before, due to COVID, we've seen a drastic decrease in ridership across services, across modes. Essentially, we're experiencing about 14% of pre-COVID ridership on the commuter rail, 25% on the T, and about 40% on the bus. And forging ahead is the process that the MBTA is using to focus our capital resources and our operating resources and our capital resources on the riders who depend on the MBTA the most. So we are defining essential services by the folks who use them. And the folks who use our essential services we've seen heavily are people of color, folks in low income communities. We also define essential services as folks or riders as those who are differently abled and those who do not have car use. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So for fiscal year 2022, we have a projected budget gap of about $579 million. We have received a handful of comments and questions about stimulus funding. And although we have received some money, it has only, in terms of our budget projections, it will only get us through fiscal year 2021. And these proposed service changes, we're hoping will get us through fiscal year 2022. And to put this in perspective, the MBTA has been operating close to 100% of pre-COVID service, even though we have experienced such a drastic drop in ridership. So this is also an initiative to make sure that we're using taxpayer dollars efficiently and making sure that we kind of, as close as possible, match the service that we are offering to the ridership that we are experiencing. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So through our analysis, we've learned that most service will be preserved. Currently, 82% of weekday trips are on essential services. But if, sorry, 82% of weekday trips are on essential services, period. We define base service as the quality of service proposed in the changes versus pre-COVID service offered. So essentially, from this like service package that we're offering, about 85% of bus service will be preserved, 70% of rapid transit service will be preserved, 65% of commuter rail will be preserved, and unfortunately 0% of the ferry will be preserved. On a grander level, what this means is that about 78% of households in the MBTA service area will have MBTA service within half a mile compared to 82% previously. And essentially, half a mile is what is kind of standard in terms of walkability to a service or to a station. Sorry. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So at a glance, I'll just go through the proposed service changes through mode really quickly. On the commuter rail, we're proposing to stop all service after 9 p.m. We're proposing to stop all weekend service, as well as decrease weekday peak service and some midday service, which means that we're decreasing the amount of trains that are moving. Additionally, we're proposing to close 6 out of 141 stops, and that's based off of low ridership, operational impacts, and availability of alternatives. Thank you. And as mentioned before, unfortunately, we are proposing to temporarily suspend all ferry service. Thank you. On rapid transit, we're proposing to stop all service after midnight, but that will, the times in which service will start will not change. We're also proposing to reduce frequency by 20% across all lines, although many may vary by line, or this may vary by line. And essentially what this means is that the headway, or the amount of time between one train and another will increase. And we're also proposing to stop or shorten or stop the E-line service at Brigham Circle. And then lastly, the bus, we're proposing to stop all service after midnight, but again, no changes to start in service or start of service and days of operation. We're also proposing to reduce frequency on essential routes by 5% on average, and reduce frequency on non-essential routes by 20%. Of the 169 routes that the MBTA offers, we're planning to consolidate 4 routes, shorten 5, and eliminate 25. And in terms of the ride, about 1.1% of trips will be shifted from ADA to premium, but there will be no changes to the geographic span of the ride. In addition to this, we're proposing to lengthen the scheduling windows by 10 minutes, from 30 minutes to 40 minutes. Thank you. And in terms of the North End, I put together a few routes that I thought might be of importance. And if I missed any, it's either because there were no changes or I missed them, so forgive me. But you can view the full list of service changes on the link that I shared in the chat. Thank you. So in terms of what this means for community engagement, we have a handful of ways for folks to give feedback. The first of which is the interactive map that I just shared. You can view that and really get down to what services might be changing. Secondly, we also have a comment form with some guided questions for folks to give us feedback about proposed changes and prioritization of service once we are ready to expand again, which is something that we're really looking forward to hear back from folks, just because we're kind of preparing for the worst case scenario. We're unsure about what federal funding would look like in post-January of next year. So if we do have to go through this, we really want to know how we can build back in a way that folks want. And lastly, we have a handful of public meetings. The meeting that I think might be most relevant to the folks here is this Saturday, November 14th. And this is a chance for folks to hear more in depth about proposed service changes, as well as to have their comments on the record and recorded for further analysis.
Are these meetings on Zoom?
Yes, they will be on Zoom.
How
again,
get the link?
It is on the link that I shared.
Okay.
You just, like, everything is on that list. You just
Right
have
here.
to keep on scrolling. Yeah, so all on the next slide is the community liaison team's information. And granted, I do not, if I see that there are questions streaming in.
We have lots of questions.
And if I do not know the answer to that question, I will be sure, it will be recorded, and I will be sure to get back to you all about that.
Just as a reminder to everybody, this meeting is being recorded. We always record our meetings and provide it to North End Waterfront. So I will start reading questions for you. Great. Slide 4, I'm going to go back to that. Did slide 4 say that these changes would take place spring, summer 2021? Why not cancel now and then bring back as Boston offices start to open back up in the spring, summer of 2021 timeframe?
Yeah, so we found, not found, but it just is so that we are going to have this community engagement period until December 2nd. And then the FMBC or FMCB will make a decision on whether to go through with these proposed service changes on December 8th. And then, sorry.
So are they looking at instead, are they looking at moving it? I mean, that was the question. Why cancel it now? Why not cancel earlier so that you can open back up when things go back to normal, hopefully in the spring, summer?
Yeah, and the answer to that question is that we have contracts that we possibly can't break, as well as we need to have this public comment period, because just because we have the data doesn't mean that like data and numbers are actually true. So we need to be sure that what we're doing isn't drastic. And honestly, like, we're also waiting to see if we can get funds in order to keep our service, because once we get rid of service, that also means we have to get rid of the cars, the trains, the equipment that the MBTA uses. And we don't necessarily, some of that we don't own ourselves. So we would need to recontract that out, and that takes a process.
Okay, can you clarify, please, has the service to accommodate reduced ridership been changed yet, or is this the MBTA waiting until spring? Yeah, I think you just answered that. I know my friends and I have been able to walk or use my bike instead of taking the T since the pandemic started, because the weather has been okay to do that. But I'm concerned once the weather does change, ice, snow, freezing temperatures, I can't use my bike or don't want to walk in bad weather, the T services won't be available. Is the MBTA taking into account how critical their services are during the winter weather?
Yes, we completely understand that the services are important during the winter. We also know that folks are worried about crowding as well, even during the pandemic and with these proposed service changes. And we're trying to account for all of that, making sure that also, if possible, we can, as folks are diverted to other routes, that we have enough equipment for folks to socially distance on our service.
Reducing rapid transit service by 20% on all lines, of course, increases the number of riders waiting on platforms and the number of riders in cars. Has the T determined how the numbers will change and how that might affect social distancing and public health risk? The Green Line trains to BC already can be quite full and a bit scary.
Yeah. So can you repeat that last part, please?
The Green Line trains to Boston College are already quite full and can be a bit scary.
No, just a little bit before that.
Has the T determined how the numbers will change and how that might affect social distancing and public health risk?
Yeah, so we have a ridership survey as well as an employers survey that we use or have been, deploying, asking about to kind of understand how employers think that they will be at, or when employers will be asking their employees to kind of come back into work, as well as the ridership survey to kind of ask what are their travel habits. We also have data on, other routes and modes, essentially like cars and bike ridership as well, to understand how people are moving about. And those are kind of the streams of data that we're using to understand, when people feel more inclined to use the MBTA service, what will those numbers look like, and how can we account for that? We're really trying to make sure that this process is iterative and flexible, because there are a lot of unknowns about this. So we're really trying to keep on our toes and make sure that we can match service to the numbers, but also taking into account our limited budget as well.
I thought ferry expansion was being explored to reduce traffic, and it seems that that is one of the safest public transport options right now, given the chance for fresh air. And why is that being killed entirely?
What is being killed entirely?
The ferries.
Oh, I'm not 100% sure why all of the ferry service is being killed. I will say that, like I said before, a huge part of our analysis is understanding who uses our ridership, and also who has accessibility to other routes of transport outside of public transit. So it is possible that the majority of folks who use the ferry have other routes of transport.
I didn't hear anything about improving bus service that is already inadequate, such as improving schedule compliance with bus 111. I'm hearing that Revere and Chelsea residents riding this bus have been in risky situations due to late and overcrowded buses. Schedule compliance must be improved. Many Chelsea riders have no other way to get to their jobs in the North End and other parts of Boston.
I do not work within, or I'm not within the circles of particularly knowing actual bus services and what happens in terms of frequency. I just I'm kind of within the realm of forging ahead in community outreach. So if you have a more directed question about actual COVID safety and public safety, I can try and get back to you about that.
Well, we'd appreciate that, because it does seem that, if you're cutting bus services and there are going to be more and more people on the buses because there's going to be fewer of them, or on the trains, that does become a health issue.
I think Angel is on the line.
Hold on.
And I'm sure he'll be able to answer that question.
I just unmuted you. There
Hi,
you go.
I apologize. We're in the midst of another public meeting that's still going on, so I wanted to step in, just introduce myself. My name is Angel Donahue Rodriguez. I'm the Director of Special Projects in the General Manager's Office. I am an East Boston resident, so I certainly am sympathetic to some of the concerns that some of the folks might have with the modes of transportation in the area. With respect to the ferries, if I could just quickly go back before we touch on the bus, we are running approximately 75 to 80% of the pre-COVID service on the ferry, and we are averaging about 7 people per boat. And it's about $14 to $16 million a year to run ferry service. So we don't believe that it's a good use of taxpayer money and commuters' money to effectively run $16 million worth of service at this very moment for an average.
Angel, can I just ask you, how many people normally take the boat, Charlestown to Long Wharf and Hingham Hill into Boston?
Those numbers are about. I could give you generally what is on all ferry service.
Pre-COVID.
They're down about 90% from where they were.
90%.
90, yeah. So ferry mimics a lot of what you see in the commuter rail when it comes to ridership. On the proposed changes on the bus, we are labeling bus, in particular the 111 bus, as essential service. And in some instances, bus routes like that are actually seeing an increase in frequency that they were seeing before the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's something that we're monitoring very closely. We get ridership data on a daily basis, and about 13% of our trips are considered crowded, and that's crowded under the new World Health Organization crowding standards that were released about 5 or 6 months ago, which is approximately 3 feet for individuals.
Okay. Okay, here's the next question, which I think a lot of people are very interested in. Are there going to be any layoffs?
Everything is on the table.
Is it being discussed?
Yeah, everything's on the table.
At what level?
What do you mean by what level? Like
Well, I
from
mean,
the top
it's
to
on the
top to
table,
bottom?
but is it
I don't
being?
know that we've gotten there yet. I think one of the things that we want to do first is see how much we can save internally and carry out the plan that we've laid out. One of those things is work that we've done with the legislature to basically allow us to be able to move our capital side of the budget salaries and be able to use and be able to shift that over to the capital side. So other agencies within state government were previously allowed to use bond funds to be able to pay for capital salaries for people that were working on capital projects. That is a net positive for us of about $66 million. And thanks to the great work from your state representative and others in the legislature and your senator, we were able to secure that. So we were able to free up about $66 million.
Have you curtailed overtime?
Huh?
Have you curtailed overtime?
Yeah, that is not entirely, but that is something that is trending downwards. And we're trying to really clamp down on that even more.
What percentage?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can get back to you.
I'm going to open a couple of mics. Sarah, I'm trying to open your mic because you've asked a lot of good questions, and I'd like you to ask your question. And Dave Kubiak, I'm going to open yours too. So let Sarah go first. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, we're getting a lot of like company updates, and my company, at least located in Boston, is planning on a full return to the office in June. So I totally hear you on closing things down now, and I recognize the importance of community involvement, but just wondering why we're comparing numbers of people not using services due to COVID to and then taking away service for when companies are planning to open up. And that just seems to me that there could be a huge economic impact if people can't get into the city or even around the city. We've already dealt with tons of traffic issues on Atlantic, and the seaport wasn't really built for public transportation. So it just seems like we're comparing apples and oranges, and would love to just understand some of the rationale for that, given that we'd all be okay with reductions now if they can open up later, but the fact that they're canceling and getting rid of vehicles and other transport, that who knows how long it'll take to bring that back to life.
That's actually that's a great question. So we were the recipients of approximately $827 million in federal aid money back in March, April, during the first COVID stimulus that was passed by Congress. That was allocated through a funding formula that the FTA has. That law required that we spend the money between last fiscal year, which was fiscal year 20, and fiscal year 21. And so that money runs dry, and that's essentially what we're spending money on now. And so the gap that we're trying to figure out is for fiscal year 22. And I understand the concern. So part of the reason why we're beginning the process now is because the MBTA is much like a huge tanker ship, right? It takes a long time to move and steer things. And so because of contractual obligations that we have with some of our bargaining units, because of the way that that the organization is set up, we need to be able to come up with a plan in the short run that allows us enough flexibility if there is something coming out of the federal government or the state to be able to return service back if we need to for FY22. So the plan that we've developed is an iterative process, and it's designed to be that. But we also have to be prudent and plan ahead and ensure that that when we are making these decisions, we give people an opportunity to have an input. And again, that's not to say that we can't change course. We can do that, and the plan does account for that. But we need to start planning in case that does not happen.
Yeah, and just one follow-up question, just especially given the investments that have been made already and the fact that it has to stay open for some more time. is any maintenance work going on? I feel like everything is way overdue on maintenance.
Yeah.
Are we taking advantage of this time to repair anything?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question. So our capital budget is still on track because of the sources of revenue that we have for those capital projects that have been planned. We are still on target to meet our record spending of $1.7 billion in capital spending. So that's still full steam ahead. There are small adjustments that we've had to make in order to flex money over from the capital side that we're allowed to use from federal money to plug in some of the holes in our operating side. But we are still planning on spending about $1.7 billion a year over the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Dave? Dave Kubiak,
Yeah,
I know you have-
well, I gotta get back to the chat here where I had a couple of comments. Has the MBTA estimated how the suspension of ferry service will affect the number of riders on alternative modes? You already answered that question for the most part by saying that very few people are taking the ferry now, so there shouldn't be a big impact on, say, buses going through Charlestown Navy Yard, for instance. Is there any ferry service though that will be suspended where there has been a larger number of riders, and what will they do? Will they start driving even more cars? We're seeing an enormous number of cars on the highways these days, and I see very few people taking the commuter rail. So I think, it's the number of cars now is partly because people are afraid to take the commuter rail. And I don't know why, because it's one of the safest places to be, in my opinion. And it's too bad you're cutting out the weekend service when I take the commuter rail. But yeah, the cars are increasing tremendously. It seems like the number of accidents are increasing tremendously. And I can't help but think that all these people that used to take the commuter rail don't know how to drive. And now they're driving and causing all these accidents. Anyhow, any ferry service that had larger numbers?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part?
Any ferry service that had larger numbers, and what will they do?
So the two main services that I think we're speaking of here are the Hingham and Hull ferry and then the Charlestown ferry, and that ridership is down about 90%. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we are running about 75% of the pre-COVID service, and we're averaging about 7 people per boat. So until we see because ferry service it mimics a lot of the same ridership patterns that the commuter rail does, until we see some sort of uptick in the commuter rail, we are proposing, and again, these are all proposals, to temporarily suspend the ferry. And I should mention, part of what we want to talk about during this public process is we've developed a sheet, and we're happy to provide that, that talks about how much each service to return back costs and the rider impacts, right? So, for example, as I pull up the sheet, bear with me for a second, to restore the ferry, partial ferry, for Charlestown and in Boston, which approximately serves 210 people now, it would cost us $1.5 million with no weekend service. To restore partially the ferry at Hingham and Hull, which would impact right now, based on ridership, 593 people a day, it would cost about $2 million. And then on the commuter rail, which would impact about 14,000 people, depending on how we would structure it, it would cost anywhere between $7 to $15 million to restore that service back. So part of the process that we're going through is we want to say to folks, we understand we're a big player in the economy and how we bounce back, and we want to be part of that. We want to hear from the public as ridership returns, which are the things that you want to see us return quickly, based on the options that we've laid out.
One of the things I'd like to see is a much expanded ferry service, many more ferry stops and all that. I think there'd be a lot more people taking the Charlestown ferry if it stopped at other locations, not just Long Wharf.
Are you looking to restore the Charlestown or the ferries once people start to go back into the office, maybe in the spring, once there's a vaccine?
I would say that those are things that are, I would imagine, are certainly on the table, and that's something that the board would probably have to decide based on what
Is it
those
something
patterns
though
are.
that, is it something you think that they would look at, or is it?
The
on
board?
table?
I think
Yeah,
the board would. I think the board would look at, based on what ridership patterns are, would look at anything that could try and alleviate certain things. But that's a call for the board.
so what's the percentage of your cutting overall on MBTA service across the board? Ferries, commuter rail, T buses?
So it varies.
What's the percentage that's being cut across?
Yeah.
the board?
So I'll give you for example. So right now, what we're proposing is essentially overall for bus, it's a 15% cut in service hours of buses.
Okay, I'm looking for actually a percentage overall on MBTA service across the board.
Service across the
Yeah,
board.
because I have slide 4 up and it has 85% bus, 70% transit, but like, what are you cutting? Is
Okay,
it 10%,
so
15% of MBTA services?
that's about, I would say about 12 to 16%, and that's based off it costs us about $1 billion a year for all of our services, give or take. Don't exactly quote me off that, but that's generally speaking. And we're proposing $127 million in cuts for FY22 and $14 million for FY21. So roughly 12%, give or take.
Is any of that going to be furloughed? Any furlough?
That is certainly on the table.
We have another question. How are you petitioning the public to see who will be in need of what mode of transportation? Also, to Sarah's point, are you petitioning larger employers, and industry leaders, influencers in the city to better understand when they will reopen, thereby understanding the demand?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are having those conversations. We've been having, as the general manager, we've been working with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. We've been working with the MBTA Advisory Board. We've been meeting with different chambers of commerce throughout our entire service network, and we've been gathering their feedback. We've also taken into consideration, based on the feedback we've gotten from them, where there is already development happening, and the ramifications of how we will return service to make good on those investments that those communities have made.
Any more questions?
Yeah, can you say a little bit more about the field monitors that will be taking a look at what's happening on the buses and in the rapid transit cars, and make sure that if this results in any problems, or even if there's already some problems on certain lines, and mainly I'm thinking about COVID protections.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about how you're monitoring in the field? Yeah.
So the way that we monitor varies by mode. Eventually, it'll be more of a uniform way that we monitor these things. So for example, on the bus, we have what they call automatic passenger counters on most of our buses. So we can pretty much get a live feed, and all the buses have cameras installed in them. So we can pretty much get a live feed of what is happening at a particular route throughout the whole day. In addition to that, that allows us flexibility to be able to dispatch buses on a particular route if we are seeing crowding based on our new crowding standards. And for perspective, we have two types of buses. We have a 40-foot bus, we have a 60-foot bus. The 40-foot bus prior to COVID, what we would consider crowding would be about 45 to 50 people. On a 60-foot bus, it would be anywhere between 60 to 65 people who would be considered crowding. With the new crowding standards, they've been cut to about a third. So on a 40-foot bus, we would consider crowding 20 to 23 people, and then probably about 28 to 30 for a 60-foot bus. And that's the metric. Those are the standards that soft standards that we've been using to redeploy assets if we've seen uptick in crowding, to maintain some sort of level of social distancing. On the commuter rail, it's a little bit more complicated. We send people out on the field at certain stations. And over the next couple of months, one way that we'll be able to track foot traffic in the commuter rail is we are going to be installing gates at Back Bay, South Station, and North Station, similar to what you have on the subway system, where you have to tap in and tap out. 90% of all the commuter rail traffic and foot traffic comes through all three of those stations. So you can get a pretty good idea of what patterns and traffics and upticks are going to be through that. On top of additional counting that happens, manual counts that happen on the trains. And on the ferry, it's similar as well.
Will you be issuing a report at some point on how well this is working or not working?
On our proposals?
Sort of a status report on what's happening as a result of these cuts, maybe 6 months after they're implemented. Or
I'm not aware that that's something that is happening, but it's something that I can bring back to the team to put out.
That's great.
Yeah. And then on the last piece, if I may, on the subway system, it lags. So we use that when someone taps in the Charlie card, and they tap into the system, that's logged in, and we track that information to be able to find out how many people have been going in on a day-to-day basis. That is that's data that we get in arrears. So for example, today we saw a 6% increase in yesterday on taps at gated stations versus the previous Thursday. So we had about 119,000 taps for riders on the subway system yesterday.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions? Anyone else? Because I'm going to wrap this up and get to our next item. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And Terry Chan from the MBTA just put up in the chat the links. So please, folks, write your comment letters. That would be great. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Sorry for being late. Take it easy, guys.
Okay. Michaela did a great job. Thank you.
Sure she did, as always.
Thank you very much. All right, folks. Our next item tonight is executive suites, and I'm going to turn this over to Dave Kubiak, who's been involved in this. And Victor, I'm going to unmute you because I know you are involved in this as well.
okay. Hey, I need to mention a couple of updates, though, on some issues that NEWRA has dealt with recently. One has to do with BWSC not being at the meeting today, and they have committed to being at our December meeting, which is great. One of the reasons that I asked for them to show up is that the people on Margaret Street and Cleveland Place are in dire straits over the construction that's been happening on those streets. And that's not just the BWSC construction. I was told it would last a month on Cleveland Place. We've been suffering for 3.5 months now. And then prior to that, we had major building construction. And prior to that, we had gas line and so forth and so on. And then I noticed there's construction happening all over the neighborhood, all types of construction. Sometimes there's several streets shut down at the same time. Some streets are shut down for extended periods of time. This has just become so difficult. I can speak for myself. I can speak for my immediate neighbors in saying that this has gotten to be just too much to bear in the North End. And so it would be great if we had a presentation soon on how much construction's been going on, not just BWSC, how much more construction is happening. Does anybody coordinate the construction that's happening in a neighborhood? Does City Hall know how much construction is happening all at one time? Does City Hall know how many streets are shut down all at the same time in the North End? All right, that's one issue. The other issue is anyone who attended our September meeting knows that NEWRA members voted to send a letter to the Secretary of Environmental Affairs and the Boston Planning and Development Agency regarding the Harbor Garage redevelopment project. I just wanted to mention that the Secretary's decision on that project was issued on October 16 and posted today in the Massachusetts Environmental Monitor. So if you go to Massachusetts Environmental Monitor, and get the current issue of the Monitor. In there, you'll see the Pinnacle at Central Wharf, and you'll be able to read the decision on that. And if you go to the BPDA's website and go to development projects and search for North End projects, downtown projects, you'll see the Harbor Garage Development Project. The BPDA has posted all public comments now, so you'll be able to read the comments that came in from well over 80 commenters. All right, executive suites. Let me try to bring up some things. NEWRA learned not from the usual channels, not from the city, but from the Alliance of Downtown Civic Organizations very recently, that 4 appeals were filed involving the buildings where there are 24 units within what's called the Brico Suites Hotel, presumably a hotel. That's what we've thought for years now, that Brico Suites is a hotel behind the stores on Hanover Street. Anyway, 4 appeals were filed to convert apartments to executive suites. Now, one of the problems with that is it means that those are still designated as residential apartments there, and they have occupancy permits as residential apartments and are taxed as residential apartments, but we know that they've been used as hotel rooms for several years, many years. The other problem is they wanted to convert to executive suites. And executive suites is actually a very loose designation in terms of inspections that would be held, in terms of the license conditions, especially conditions related to public safety, compared to what would be required of a hotel. A hotel has much more restrictions on it, more inspections, more public safety code requirements and all of that, compared to this looser designation of executive suite. So, but the more immediate issue was NEWRA was not aware of these appeals, was not aware of the hearings before the Zoning Board of Appeals that took place this past Tuesday. So we sent a letter, the executive committee sent a letter asking that the hearing be deferred to allow NEWRA to hear about the appeals, to be able to ask questions, and to be able to provide public comment, community comment to the Zoning Board of Appeal. Now that would have happened at our next meeting on December 10th, because our meeting this month, today, is 2 days after the public hearing this past Tuesday. So as I said, NEWRA did send a letter. Can I show that? Do I have
You can share.
co-host?
Hold on one second. Share. Oh, nope. Hold on.
Let me know when you see the letter, if you see the letter.
I opened it up so you can share.
And do I have to do something to share?
You do. You have to click on share screen and you'll see your screen pop up.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. Where is shared screen?
I'm at the bottom of the screen.
Oh, there it is.
Right in the
Got it.
middle. So click on that.
Yeah.
When you click on that, it should put up your whole desktop, and then just click on the document
Let's see.
that you have open.
Do you see it?
Yes, it's right there.
Awesome. So I just wanted to make sure that NEWRA members, especially, and other North End residents know about this letter from the executive committee to the Zoning Board of Appeal. Full disclosure that this letter was sent on November 6th to the Board of Appeals seeking the deferral of the hearing to a later date. And I'm gonna read it very quickly. The North End Waterfront.
Just read some of it, Dave, because last time
Okay.
when we did one of these, we got a lot of people asking us not to do that. And
Okay.
it should be up on North End Waterfront.
Let
And
me
you
read
can
just
summarize it.
50 points. The North End Waterfront Residents Association requests that the 4 subject appeals, and by the way, there were 4 appeals for the one Brico's operation, because there's 4 contiguous buildings, a certain number of units within each building, totaling 24 units that would be converted to executive suites. So be deferred to a later hearing date that will allow the North End waterfront community to review and discuss the appeals and provide community input, as I earlier stated. On the issue of the 24 units, this is important. We are concerned of the precedent that may be set and used by future property or business owners by approving apartment to executive suite conversions in multiple properties with different addresses and different listed owners that can circumvent the city and state limits on the number of executive suites. So right now there are limits on executive suites of up to 9 per property. But when you have 4 buildings together, contiguous buildings, you can have, in this case, 24 units possibly being operated as executive suites had the zoning board of appeal approved these, approve the appeals. And we mentioned in here about the differences between the hotel requirements versus the executive suites requirements. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that this letter had been sent. The Alliance of Downtown Civic Organizations also sent a letter, a very similar letter, also asking for deferral of the hearing. Well, what happened at the hearing on Tuesday is that the Zoning Board of Appeal denied the appeals. So there was no reason to defer. They denied the 4 appeals. Now, if the occupancy, the legal occupancy at Brico Suites is still residential apartments, as it appears to be from these appeals, they're going to have to get permission to operate those units as a hotel if in fact that's what they continue to do. So I expect that if that's the case, we'll be seeing other appeals to convert those units from residential apartments to hotel rooms, possibly. So it'll be interesting how this, where this goes in the future, to legalize the use, whatever use they're proposing to continue with at Brico Suites. Any comments or questions?
Any questions in the chat? I don't see any yet.
Okay.
No. We did have someone ask a question about the hotel on Cross Street. And we will, some of us have actually spoken with Bill Calder, and we're going to invite him to come to NEWRA. Does anyone, no one has any questions for Dave about the executive suites? No, I guess not. Yeah, we are working on our website. We're trying to be able to post those letters. We're still trying to figure that out. So hopefully it'll be soon. Is there anything else? Dave, Victor, do you have anything else? Either one
No,
of
I
you?
think Dave has covered it nicely.
Yeah, he has. All right, well, I think that's all we have this evening, folks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And as I said, if you have anyone you'd like to hear from or any topics you want us to bring up at a meeting, just let us know. Dave, you should stop sharing your screen.
You should do it for me.
I can't. I can't. I actually can't. You have to hit stop share. All right, we're gonna end the meeting. All right, if no one has anything else, thank you, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next month. Bye, Lenore and Leanna. I see you guys waving. Bye.